This build does a ton of damage and it's super fun to play. This build doesn't rely on cooldown reduction, attack speed, or resource cost, but it's super simple and fun to play. So let me show you what this build is and how it works. First of all, we have 6 skills on our skill bar. Now most of the time, we're really just spamming our Rampage button to recast the Brute. As you can see, when I recast the Brute, it doesn't use any dominance, and it's just recasting the same summon. And it does a ton of damage, AoE damage. You're also going to want to spam evade, because with the item Footfalls, your evade is now a nether step, and your nether step gives you 60% damage reduction. So the skill rotation would be like this. First of all, you would activate Lalish's active, which is Command Lalish, on a group of elites. Then you'll use evade to make sure that you have the damage reduction ready for the fight. And then you're going to use your metamorphosis to make sure that you have a damage increase, which is based off your maximum life. But to be honest, as you guys saw here, this is a T12. And before I even was able to do my entire skill rotations, the enemies just kind of died. So this skill rotation really matters when you're doing high pits. But when you're just doing torments, you might just be able to spam metamorphosis and your rampage button and just kill everything. So when you get to the boss room, you're gonna want to summon Lalish, do metamorphosis, dodge, and then put out your profane sentinel, as well as recasting your brute. And that was an easy T12 boss. So this build mainly revolves around one thing, which is really your Rampage skill. Your Rampage skill is a summon of a greater demon, but because this is the Abyss skill variation, you don't actually summon multiple demons. You're focusing on recasting the same demon over and over again. So instead of just summoning your Rampage and letting it wreak havoc on the enemies, you're actually going to recast it over and over, which does more damage. Most of your other skills are there to increase the damage of your recast and to support you. We'll talk about this more in the skills section, but your first skill, Command Lalish, which is the active of Summon Lalish, is just something that applies vulnerable, slow, as well as damage to your enemies and helps you fight elite packs or even the boss. Your nether step is your mobility skill as well as your defensive skill. If you're using the boots that I have, which is Footfalls of the Waning World, you should be turning your evades into nether steps. And your nether step actually gives you 60% damage reduction that fades. And so constantly evading is going to give you that damage reduction that you need while fighting mobs. Your third skill, Rampage, is again your spammable skill. And this is just me doing damage without any other multipliers on here, like Metamorphosis. So this is your spammable skill. And as you can see, it doesn't really use a lot of dominance. And there's no cooldown on it either. Metamorphosis is your ultimate and gives you damage based on your maximum life. This is why we do prioritize maximum life in our gear and affixes. Look at the damage difference between using Metamorphosis and not using Metamorphosis. So this is me just spamming the brute without using Metamorphosis. And this is after using Metamorphosis. This is why it's so important to spam Metamorphosis whenever it's off cooldown. Your fifth skill is Command Fallen. And it's these cute little grunts. I think they're called grunts. You can summon them, and they deal damage to your enemies as well as getting you dominance while they do that. So normally when I'm just attacking little mobs, I don't summon the fallen grunts because the mobs die before I can ever summon the fallen grunts. But if you're fighting elites or a boss, or just every 20 seconds if you're not lazy, all you gotta do is press command fallen 3 times and let them run around. And if you press X again, it'll just redirect them to where you want them to go. Your final skill is Profane Sentinel, and it's not a skill that you should spam or that you have to use all the time. In fact, when you're just fighting mobs, you really don't need it. It's a single target skill, so you should use it when you're fighting elite packs that you think are difficult or the boss. So if you put down this Profane Sentinel, as you can see, it does damage to the target, and throughout the duration the damage becomes stronger. Oh, and one thing I should mention about Nether Step is that when you use Nether Step, it not only refreshes the duration of your skills, of your summons, but it also teleports them to where you're going. So let's say you were wanting to go to another area, you could just Nether Step and bring your Profane Sentinel with you. As you just saw, the Profane Sentinel was doing trillions of damage. A couple more things about the build. First of all, we're using the Igni and Prid runes, and what that does is that makes you able to use your Dark Prison skill, which helps weaken enemies and also fortifies you, keeps you constantly fortified, which is going to affect your crushing aspect, and it reduces damage coming from outside the circle by 45%. So that's pretty important that you have those 2 runes. But let's get into our gear and aspects right away. So first of all, for the helm, you want the Air of Perdition, not only because it does double the damage, but you also get critical strike chance, which is really important for the build to function. And then for your chest armor, you're gonna want the affixes that you want to prioritize are willpower, obviously, and then max life. And again, you're prioritizing max life because of your metamorphosis, which scales its damage based off max life. And then armor and resistance to all elements. You want to temper max life on pretty much all of your armor pieces, and you want Igni and Prid runes on here. And the aspect that you want is Heavenly Strength, because that means that while wielding a 2-handed weapon, you gain X amount of damage reduction. So that's going to be really huge for your defense. This also means that even if you don't have the exact right gear for this build, you have to remember that you have to use a 2-handed weapon, because without the 2-handed weapon, this aspect won't work. For the gloves, I recommended the aggressive aspect, and what this aspect does is that while moving, you gain up to 60% increased damage. Basically, if you keep moving, you get these stacks. See over here with the boot sign, you get these stacks while you're moving, and if you keep moving, those stacks stay consistent. So that's an extra 50% damage increase, 60% damage increase when you keep moving. And you don't have to move all the time. You can move and attack, move and attack, move and attack, etc. For your gloves, I recommended critical strike damage multiplier, and that's always going to be a GA if possible. And the next one would be vulnerable damage multiplier with a GA as well. And then we're going to prioritize maximum life, and finally critical strike chance. Now, if you don't have enough critical strike chance, something that I do recommend is that you go with Aspect of Calamity, which Aspect of Calamity makes it so that Hex increases your critical strike chance against an enemy up to basically like 60%. Now with this Blasphemous Fragment, which is your soul shard ability, your recast skills hex enemies on hit and increase the damage they take from your Abyss Demonology skills by 20%. So you're constantly going to be hexing your enemies. So that's going to be able to contribute to the aspect of Calamity if you don't have enough critical strike chance. But if you have at least around like 50%, you should just try to prioritize getting more crit strike chance and just switching over to aggressive aspect, because it's not going to be as worth it to take an aspect when it overflows, like the aspect of Calamity. Next, for your pants, I recommended Temerity. And so the most important thing would be the passive, as well as certain stats. Like, I would try to make sure that willpower and maximum life are a part of the stats. And the passive is that effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant you a barrier up to however much percentage of your maximum life that lasts for 6 seconds. So that's going to work together with your mercenary, Variana, and her skills. As you can see, her final skill, Taste of Flesh, is when you or Variana deal direct damage to an enemy inflicted with any of her bleeding effects, you heal for 1% of your maximum life. The next item is your boots, and I recommended Footfalls of the Waning World. And something that's really nice to have on your boots on top of willpower and maximum life would be attacks reduce evade cooldown affix, because basically with this passive, your evade is now a nether step, and your evade cooldown is reduced by X seconds. So every time you evade, you're actually going to nether step. And if you remember correctly, nether step gives you damage reduction, and it also gives you mobility. Even though the evade version of the nether step, you move quite like a little slower, or you move less, but it's still nice to have that nether step. Also, what it does is it also prolongs your demon summons. It prolongs them, and it also teleports them to your location when you use the nether step. Next up is your weapon, and you're going to be using a two-handed mace. And the most important stat that you want on your weapon is weapon damage, which you're going to want to masterwork onto it, and ideally have a GA on. And then next up is critical strike damage multiplier. And after that, you're going to want maximum life, and then finally willpower. And it's very important that for this weapon, you temper on critical strike chance and make sure it's a greater affix, because there's only ever so many chances to get critical strike chance onto your gear, and this is one of the biggest places you can get it. And the aspect that's going to go on your weapon is the Hellbent Commander aspect, and it's one of your biggest multipliers, so we're going to put that on a two-hand to make it even larger. Next up is your amulet, and we're going to use a legendary amulet for this. It's going to have the crushing aspect, which is while fortified, you deal X amount of increased damage. And since you're basically almost always fortified, this is also going to be a huge multiplier, which is why this is in the amulet slot. The affixes in order of importance are critical strike damage multiplier, vulnerable damage multiplier, all damage multiplier, and maximum life. You can try to get crit chance in your amulet as well if you happen to get crit chance, or you feel like you need more crit chance. You can replace a stat with, ideally not the first two stats, but it is possible to replace a stat with critical strike chance as well. The next up is Lurid Pact, and this is one of your more important uniques because it gives you up to a 240% increased damage for Rampage, which is the main skill that we use. So obviously the passive is going to be the most important, but if you can prioritize certain stats, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, critical strike chance, and maximum life are all good stats to prioritize. And for the temper, you're going to want to temper just a critical strike damage. You can temper demonology damage, but since critical strike damage has a higher additive, you can just go for the critical strike damage instead. Finally, we're going to go with Edgemaster's aspect for the second amulet, which second ring, which is a legendary. And that's when skills deal up to X% increased damage based on your available primary resource. So since you don't use any Wrath, which is your primary resource, or you barely use Wrath, using this is going to be also really good for you. This is going to give you a lot of damage. And the affixes that you want to prioritize are very similar to the Lurid Pact, where it's just critical strike damage, vulnerable, critical strike chance, and maximum life. And again, you temper on the critical strike damage. Your charms are also a pretty important part of the build. As you can see, you want to use a 6-slot charm, or 6-slot seal. And the seal doesn't matter so much, but there are certain seals that are better for us. Like, obviously the seal has... I can't use the Chains of Horizon, but it has a 22% multiplicative critical strike damage. Multiplier, sorry. It has a 22% critical strike damage multiplier. So I'm using that. Another one I have is a Shadow of Harash one, which gives me 10% while in shadow form, but that's not as good as a 22%. So I use this seal. And then the set charm that you want to use is going to be the Harash's Shadow set charm. And that makes it so if you have 5, basically you get damage reduction while in shadow form, which is when you're purple, this is shadow form. So as you can see, I'm all purple and I leave behind this trail thanks to my charm. That's part of it. So, and leaves the sigil of subversion shadow trails behind you while moving. So that's what my charm does. So it puts me in the shadow form and leaves behind trails. But importantly, as a 5 set, your abyss skill damage is increased by 350% while you have shadow form, but each cast consumes 1 stack. For the skill tree, I didn't include a leveling guide for the skill tree. I know it's a little different now to level your skills. It's not just it's not just like a linear thing. So basically, focus on leveling your skills enough to progress to the next skills until you can get Metamorphosis. But and Rampage, and then put all your points into Rampage, and then go from there. So for your skills, your first skill that you're gonna take is a basic skill. It's Command Fallen, and it is now an Abyss skill and summons up to 3 Fallen Grunts for 20 seconds, which deal damage and generate 10 Wrath per hit. Which doesn't really matter because you don't need Wrath. You don't use Wrath. But Command Fallen deals damage for every demon you have, and also, this is the important part, every 15 times you hit enemies with Command Fallen, you gain 1 dominance. So it's a way for you to passively gain some dominance. And here you can see these 3 grunts. As soon as I summon, so you just have to press your button 3 times and they come out and they attack things for 20 seconds. And every 20 seconds you can just resummon them. Your next skill, in the sense of in order of the skill tree, your next skill is Dark Prison, and this is actually a skill that's not in your skill bar. You really use it in your runes. The Prid rune uses this skill, and Dark Prison, basically, the important thing about Dark Prison is that enemies within Dark Prison are weakened, and hitting enemies within Dark Prison fortifies you for 1% of your maximum life. Basically, it fortifies you almost all the time, which is really important for the crushing aspect to work. And also, it reduces damage coming from outside by 45% and slows enemies within by 80%, so it CCs them. which is also important because you have a Paragon board that has an interaction with CC. Your next ability is Nether Step, and your Nether Step, the important thing about Nether Step is that you first of all gain stacks of shadow form, so you want to constantly be spamming evade because of your footfalls. It's gonna give you Nether Step all the time. It gives you increased movement speed, which decays over 8.4 seconds. But on top of movement speeds, it grants 60% damage reduction, which is great. And on top of that, it also extends the duration of your summons and brings them with you to the place that you teleport to. So that's what makes your Nether Step really important, and you really want to be spamming this with your evade as much as possible. Your next skill is Rampage, which is arguably your most important skill, and it's your what's the word for it? Spammable. It's your spammable skill. You summon a rampaging brute for 10 seconds, and the important thing about this skill is when it becomes an abyss skill, it summons a larger demon that deals 50% increased damage. You can keep recasting the demon to leap around the battlefield, dealing more damage and also having a chance to knock down enemies. So Rampage also has a 100% chance to trigger Eviscerate, Volatility, or Knockdown hit effect when striking unaffected elite enemies. So that's why it's so good at taking down elites. Your next skill is the Profane Sentinel, which is the skill you use to fight bosses and maybe some elite packs if they're difficult. But it basically summons a demonic eye, so it's another greater demon summon. And it locks into this. When it locks into the same enemy, it becomes stronger and stronger every second. So this version of Profane Sentinel does more damage when it hits only a single target, etc. So it's really good for bosses. And finally, your last skill is Metamorphosis, and that's your ultimate skill. So in this Terror Demon form, it becomes an Abyss skill, and you basically get Shadow Form stacks every four Shadow Form stacks every second. And Abyss skills do not break its stealth, so you're constantly in stealth if you're using Abyss skills only. Also, as you can see, Metamorphosis increases your Demonology skill damage based on your maximum life, which is why we prioritize maximum life as one of our affixes. It also reduces your dominance cost by 20%. But it does have a cooldown of 13.84 seconds. So there's going to be a time where you're not going to be having your Metamorphosis, but you're going to want to spam it whenever it's off cooldown, when you're not walking around. I did initially use Flicker Step with the Metamorphosis as my unique charm, but I changed that to the Seed of Horazon because the Seed of Horazon actually deals increased damage per wrath you have, and you take reduced damage per dominance you have. And since I don't use any wrath, it's like awesome because it's like having an extra Edge Masters. Here are your paragons and glyphs. So for the first paragon board, the glyph is going to be Abyssal, which is 7.8% increased damage with Abyss skills, and also increased damage to vulnerable targets by 15%. The next board is Demonic Spicules, which is damaging enemies with demonology skills shreds their soul, permanently increasing all damage you deal to them by 40% and gaining 2% per hit up to 120%. So that's huge. And the glyph you're going to want to take is Demonologist, which is 7.7% increased damage with demonology skills for every 5 willpower, and also 17% increased damage while you have a greater demon summoned, which you always do because that's your Rampage Brute. For the third board, you're going to take Greater Hex. Applying Hex, vulnerable, or weakened to enemies permanently reduces damage they deal to you by 25%, and they take 75% increased damage from you. And if you remember from my Soul Shard, I'm constantly applying Hex with my recast ability, which is my Rampage, so this should be applying to you a lot. And then the glyph that I'm taking is Eldritch Sight, which gives you 4.1% increased damage to vulnerable per willpower, and also dealing damage to a vulnerable target increases your damage up to 18%. The next board you have is Overmind, which is where Abyss skills deal 45% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies and 65% increased damage to elites, which is awesome because that's 65% increased damage to elites. But also, you have ways to crowd control enemies. For example, with your Lalish that does that, and also with your Dark Prison that can also slow enemies as well. So that's going to be a huge thing for your board. And also, the glyph you want is Mastermind, which is 4.4% increased damage with Abyss skills for every willpower, 5 willpower. And you deal 18% increased damage while in shadow form, which you should always be in shadow form since you're spamming evade and spamming nether step. For the final board, you're going to take Dominion, which is spending dominance to summon a demon reduces the wrath cost of your demonology skills by 50% and increases all your damage by 80% for 12 seconds. So obviously you don't spend wrath, but the increased damage is great. And the glyph that you want to take is grants 262.5 bonus to all rare nodes within the range, as well as hits from Archfiend's skills increase the damage enemies take by 4% for 20 seconds, stacking up to 20%. If you enjoyed the guide or you like the content, please consider liking, subscribing, or commenting down below. And I'm live every day on twitch.tv/Cocosaur, so you can come check me out on my Twitch stream. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!